Here's everything that you need to know about Lady Macbeth in under 10 minutes. Let's go. So when I think about Lady Macbeth, I think in a nutshell, she is a manipulator. She is very much a woman of her time, but equally she is a progressive type who challenges expectations. I like to think about her in three main ways. I like to think about her femininity. I like to think about the way that she applies pressure. And I like to think about her guilt. And I mean guilt in both senses of the word. So let's start with her femininity. Now, for Lady Macbeth, her femininity holds her back. In her own mind and in her own words, femininity is what holds her back. So she talks very early on in the play, when we first come across her, as being essentially limited by her femaleness and her womanhood. She talks about wanting to make thick her blood. She talks about wanting to be unsexed. She talks essentially about wanting to do away with the things that make her female, because in her understanding, the things that make her female are also the things that stop her acting on her desires and her wishes. So when she says she wants to make the blood thick, she means she doesn't want the blood to fall. She's essentially referring to menstruation there, essentially meaning she doesn't want to menstruate, i.e. she doesn't want to do something which is archetypally female, okay? Same thing with unsex me here. She wants to take away her female sex and basically be the man in her eyes and therefore be a man of action. That's the way that she sees masculinity. She uses this idea of masculinity. Obviously it limits her, but she uses it against her husband, or rather for him, in order to try and influence his behaviour. So when she applies pressure to Macbeth, what she is doing most of the time is she is challenging his masculinity. She says, "Art thou a man?" And when you would do it, then you were a man. She very much targets this idea of what it means to be a man. And in her understanding, what it means to be a man is to be active, to be violent, to act on these bloody desires. And we can tell that it works on Macbeth, because when he responds, he says, I am a man, I do all that becomes a man. I would do everything about masculinity apart from face this ghost. So he spends a lot of time kind of defending his own masculinity in response, and he also is kind of weakened by it and follows her instructions, indeed achieving what they both set out to do. So Lady Macbeth compensates for her feminine trappings of her physical form by using her language against her husband to pressure him in terms of his masculinity. And there are lots of ties that we could make to kind of the context of the time. We can think about Elizabeth I, who obviously died not long before this play was conceived, because Elizabeth I famously said to the troops at Tilbury, I may have the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king. And what she is doing there is recognizing the duality of womanhood, the fact that we can have this physical weakness or the limitations on her actual actions and behavior from society and biology, but at the same time, we can see that within we have the capacity to do things, particularly when influencing other people, whether it is Elizabeth I sending her troops to war, or whether it is Lady Macbeth sending her husband to kill King Duncan. All of this, however, comes crashing down for Lady Macbeth later on in the play when we see her guilt. And when I say guilt, I'm talking about both meanings of the word. Literal culpability, so you are to blame for something, but also the sensation of remorse, that type of guilt, because she is challenged by both. Because in the start of the scene later on in the play, just before her last appearance on the stage, she is sleepwalking and trying to get the damn spot out of her hand. She's referring, of course, to the blood on her hands. Metaphorically, blood on your hands, we all know as an idiom, is guilt. You have done something wrong. And she's trying to wash away the blood, meaning to get rid of her guilt, her culpability, her blameworthiness. But what she can't do is clean away her own sense of guilt, her sense of remorse. She thinks about, she's referred elsewhere in the play to the old man having so much blood in him in this scene, or I would have done it myself if he hadn't looked like my father as he slept. All of these ideas to do with her very kind of, in her mind, and certainly in Shakespearean audience's mind, these kind of feminine thoughts to do with kind of compassion. Indeed, earlier on in the play, that idea of compassion, she talks about how she has given suck to a babe, i.e. she has mothered children before, but if she had committed to doing something, she would have dashed the brains out of the child. She's saying that this feminine urge to be compassionate and nurturing is what holds her back, and she wants to basically get rid of it. But she can't, and that sense of nurture and compassion is what leads to her downfall, her descent into insanity, and this moment when she is sleepwalking. Yes, she's sleepwalking, yes, she's sleep talking, but what she's really indicating is that she has fallen into madness. In Shakespeare's day, this sense of insanity as a medical condition was not at all well understood, and it was thought that your innermost thoughts and desires and feelings would manifest themselves in dreams, and this was long before Freud came along and kind of characterized the nature of the psyche in dreams, etc. It was just this very vague notion that your true self comes out in your sleep, and if your true self is mad, then that will be spoken out loud. What is particularly damning about this is earlier on in the play, she had criticized her husband when he basically exposed himself and his misdeeds during the feast where Banquo's ghost appears. She criticizes him for exposing himself with their private life, i.e. the murder, whereas in this scene, she's talking openly in public, walking around her castle in the middle of the night in front of the doctor and the gentlewoman who hear everything that she says. That fall from grace for her of being in control of the situation and the boundaries between private and public life to falling apart and just spilling the beans is the clearest indicator that we have that Lady Macbeth has gone through an arc from fighting with her femininity, using femininity to apply pressure on masculinity, to that whole sense of gender being at the heart of her downfall. So that's Lady Macbeth in a nutshell. Got it?